Well, hey, Colin, great to be with you again. I know we were talking a little about making it real, right? I think when you're a seller or you're a leader, you're starting out in your career, often you look at this, this daunting task, or so you think, of where you want to go.
Yeah.
Where do I start? How do I begin? Maybe you've got humble beginnings. And I've always been fascinated by your story. And I'd love to hear, how did you, get from where you began to where you are now? I'd love to hear the story of how you really invented yourself.
Yeah. So I was raised by a single mom, and we grew up, poor. We didn't have a lot of money. She had to work. My dad was never around. And I didn't have, my mom had to work nights, so I was kind of left to my own devices a lot of times, sometimes getting into probably more trouble than I should have. And just kind of was, as a kid, like, had to figure out a lot of things on my own because my mom wasn't always there, my dad wasn't around. And so I learned to be fairly independent from a very young age. And when I was around my dad, it was really never good. I got exposed to a lot of things that I shouldn't have. And I didn't really know, as a kid growing up, like, I didn't have a lot of aspirations of, I want to be this thing, or I want to go to school to do this, or there wasn't even a lot of influence, positive influences in my life saying, like, hey, you need to go to college or anything like that. All I knew was, like, I didn't want to live that way, where it was, check to check, struggle to pay the rent. One of the biggest, memories that I have as a kid that kind of like shaped, like, I don't want to live this way was, being in the grocery store in like middle school and, paying for our groceries with food stamps and being, extremely embarrassed and just hoping that, like, none of my friends from school would see us. And so that kind of, created a lot of drive and motivation for me to, like, do more and do better and not live that way. So I barely made it through high school. I didn't go to college. I got my first sales job at 22. And I just knew, based on, the people that were there, the kind of money that they were making, the lifestyles that they had, I knew there was opportunity. And I knew that, like, that was my way out. And it wasn't your typical sales story. It was like, hey, I went to school to do this really cool thing and then realized I didn't like it, so I got into sales, right? You've heard that probably more times than you can even count, right? I've, also, talked to tons of salespeople like yourself, and that's the typical story. Sales was my plan B. I kind of got into sales kicking and screaming. I was so, excited and pumped up for that opportunity because I knew that it was my way out of not living like the way that I grew up. And so, and there was one thing early on, that stuck with me. It was like, just outwork your competition and you'll be fine. Even if you don't do everything right and you suck sometimes and you make mistakes, as long as you learn from them, then you'll be fine. Just outwork your competition. And that's what I did. So, a lot of it was just, I was the first one into the office every day. I was the last one to leave every day. And then I came in on Saturdays to do proposals, to get my list ready, to do any, tie up any loose ends so that I could focus on revenue generating activities on Monday. And, I did that for quite some time, and I worked my way up to the top there pretty quickly. And I learned some good things. I learned some bad habits, but I got the experience of, like, hard work and building relationships and, not being scared to pick up the phone and all these kind of essential things to be successful in any sales role.
Very powerful story. And there's some common themes that I think apply because, like you said, I know you talk to a lot of sellers, and I think you hit on something that's very important there is some of the common threads of a successful seller. First off, that independence, that ability to develop autonomy. There's a couple of things that come out of that, Colin. First off, it makes you more equipped to go out and find the answer, but it also empowers your leadership to trust you. If they know that I can count on Colin to get the number, guess what? I want Colin on my team, and I'm going to let Colin do what he needs to do to be successful. So being able to develop that autonomy is going to serve you well all throughout your career. The other element that you hit on too is that you didn't necessarily have a lot of aspirations per se early on. I'm fascinated by this because I felt the same way, and I also see it sometimes in others. And I read a lot, but I don't read the sales books or the leadership books as often as I think some do. I read biographies of
Mm.
people that motivate me or drive me. Michael Jordan is a prime example. He had no idea what he wanted to do. He was called lazy by his family as a kid.
Wow.
But guess what? When he found something that he was passionate about and a way that he could use his passions and things that got him going, he was the best ever. He was the greatest competitor ever. And he did all of the things that you articulated later on throughout what you just described. You realize what you don't want. I think that's key as well. Sometimes it's not all about understanding what you want. It's about understanding what you don't want to have happen, or the result that you don't want. And so I think
Mhm.
to if you don't know what your drive is or your why is or your motivation is, that's okay. Figure out what gets you going. What's your what kind of juices you. And I think if you find out some of these things and you can parlay your passions into what you do, you'll be all the more successful. I was the same way. We've talked about this a lot. Like I had no desire necessarily to get into sales, but once you get that sense of the money and the opportunity that exists, if you're good at sales, there's always going to be a job for you somewhere, because sales is something that every organization needs, and they need effective sellers. So if you develop an acumen for this and become a student and understand everything that you can, you can go very far. I had no idea what I wanted to do in college. I wound up in sales because I wanted a customer service job, and it just wound out being a sales role. And I was successful because I had to be. I had no choice. I had to figure out how to make this work, and ultimately did. But outworking your competition, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, you don't want to be. You want to find these people that you deem smarter, better than you, people that are doing well, find their best practices, assimilate them into your process, and that is how you are ultimately going to be a phenomenal salesperson, phenomenal in your career, phenomenal leader.
Yeah,
I think you
yeah.
hit on a lot of great things there.
Yeah, I think that last thing you mentioned there too is so key, right? Is not trying to be the smartest person in the room, right? Like sometimes salespeople can have a big ego or think that they're unique or special, or they want to do things their way. And there's a lot of people that, kind of spread this message of doing things your way. And there's some merit to that. But like when you're new in your role, don't try to recreate the wheel. Like there's people that have been doing what you've been doing for longer before you and have had some success, and like just use that resource that's available to you. And then once you get some success there, then you could get your own iteration of your own version of, how you do things or whatever, And so I think that it's so common that people want to be so unique or be different or do things my way, or that doesn't feel right to me. But you need a good starting off point, and you should start with something that's already been proved to be a successful path. And then you can test and experiment from there.
Go down the tried and true roadmap and earn the right to do it your way. Several years ago, I started doing some of the things around leveraging social selling, leveraging digital platforms, where a lot of people in my role weren't doing that, especially not
Mhm.
to the degree that I was. And at first, it was looked at as an anomaly. And in
Mm.
fact, I ran up against exactly what you described. There's still the expectation that you do and deliver upon the key activities or metrics that exist in the business. But over time, because I started to develop a lot of results based on what I was doing in that process, then I started being asked to evangelize that, to train it, to coach it. But it didn't happen overnight. You've got to really work hard on the established roadmap, as you said, and then earn the right to do things your way. I'm a firm believer when you start out in a role, you've earned the right to be in that role. And your organization, your leadership, they owe you the training, the coaching, the tools, the resources to get it done. But absolutely, you've got to go out and execute. And you've got to make sure you earn your keep, hit that number. But then there comes some liberties with making the result, making the number. Something else I wanted to hit on too. I know you're a big believer in networking and investing in relationships. You've developed a lot, and what's fascinating to me, and I like to tell this story, is that you and I connected on LinkedIn. I actually saw an article talking about your show, and
Yeah.
I was listening. I started reviewing some of your material, and I was like, this. He's doing this differently. I liked the way that you approached sales and leadership, and wanted to connect. And so we started developing a rapport. We've talked several times now and collaborated on a few projects. And this is a relationship that wouldn't have existed without digital and without social media. And I'm a big believer in leveraging that to make the relationship real, to open the door that wouldn't necessarily exist otherwise. But what you do with it after that is what's so important. And I think that's what a lot of people might miss. What are your thoughts, Collin, on networking, building relationship, and just the value of relationships in a career?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in this, because let's talk about some of like the common mistakes, right? People connect with people, and then, like LinkedIn, for example, that's where I spend most of my time. The other social platforms aren't as relevant to me. And so many people connect on there, and it's a good place to get the relationship started. But they don't ever, take it off the platform and have a conversation, and or they, don't lead with any sort of, value. And so like an opportunity to create content together or collaborate with somebody is a great way to establish a relationship. But even just in that context, like, most people will do that once, and then they disappear. And this can even go into even certain selling styles, right? There's the sellers that get the deal and disappear, right? And so a lot of these, practices are coming from leadership, where it's all about the activities and the next deal. And, these relationships are more important than most people realize, because, if, getting a deal and then the deal churning, or getting a deal and then not actually investing enough in the relationship to be in a place where you're comfortable to ask for referrals, or they don't just naturally want to give you referrals. That's a huge missed opportunity. And that's a major difference that can separate like an average seller versus an elite seller. Somebody who understands, investing in the people in the relationship, because their reputation matters, what they do on social, what they do, in sales meetings, what they do after they get the sale. All of those things play a big role in, whether you're going to be an average seller or you're going to be an elite seller. And so using social, it's the easiest way to get access to people, but that's just the beginning. And so what you do, after you've maybe got their attention matters, how you interact with those people. If you're really in it just to get something and not give anything, that's going to probably ruin your reputation right from the beginning. And what people don't realize, and there's still a lot of this going on, and it's less now because of, some of the new restrictions, where people are a little bit more cautious of who they're connecting with. People are, not as quick to, throw up a big sales pitch, in your DMs, but it's still happening because of some of the restrictions. But like that's the biggest way to actually like ruin your chances of ever building any sort of trust or relationship with that person. Like their perception of you immediately from the first interaction is negative. And it blows my mind how people have not figured this out yet.
There is definitely a nuance to all of it. And I think I was having a conversation about this the other day. The fact that it's so easily accessible by everyone dilutes the effectiveness of it, because you've got so many other people that are out there using it maybe for the wrong reasons or using it the wrong way. But I think, first off, there's a great responsibility that comes with it. And that also gives the opportunity for people that do it right to really stand out in a unique way, get noticed, and yield results as a direct result of it. I think part of it, we got to revisit the why. Like, why would we leverage social? It's because you can go where your audience is. There's a lot of power in that. I liken it as like being able to put a billboard out there on the road that they're driving every day. But you've got to make sure that it exemplifies like what's your brand. What do you want your brand to say about you whenever you're connecting with this person? Because you nailed it, Collin. The perception is everything. If you put somebody off through that way, I mean, that's you're pretty much, you've shot yourself in the foot as far as developing a relationship there. The social platform is a great place to start the relationship, but it's not the end all be all. And even when I coach and train social, I don't talk about just one thing, one platform. Yeah, LinkedIn has been great for me, but I build lists and I build valuable events and newsletters and just ways to engage people in a way that I'm not always just trying to sell them something. It's like, hey, here's something of value to you that's part of the existing relationship or the existing investment. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but if this is a value, or like you hit on, what can we do together? Is there something we could do from a partnership perspective, or is there some kind of content that we could create together? Look at what you can do together. Look at what you can deliver there together. Don't just start the relationship or the dialogue. Don't just sell something and then disappear. Relationships are everything. Investing in relationships over time. I mean, every role that I've been pulled into in my career for the last probably 15 years, I've been pulled into because of a relationship that I made, except one. I found one online that I applied to that I ended up getting. And the only reason my resume was noticed was because of a book I had written. That made my resume stand out. So finding the ways to exemplify what is unique about your brand, and then also having relationships that you build, that's going to help you tremendously in your career. The other thing too is you never know where that executive that you sold to at this organization is going to go. If you develop and keep a relationship there and they go to another organization, guess what? They're going to say, hey, I want to do business with Collin. He did me right at this organization. I believe that he'll do the same here. So that's the importance of developing that relationship. We hit on something too around personal brand. And I'd love to ask you a question around personal brand, because I know you've done a lot to really build and maintain your brand around selling and around the podcasts and things that you have done and continue to show others how to do. So having a philosophical dialogue with somebody the other day around personal brand. And I think sometimes, first off, people are often they don't want to dabble out there. They always talk about, hey, I've thought about doing a book, or I've thought about doing a podcast, or I've thought about doing blogging. I say just get out there and do it. I've made a lot of mistakes when it comes to that stuff. I've made videos that got hardly any views or engagements, but I've done some that have gotten so many and created relationships that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And that's the reward in all of it. The personal brand, I think, too, sometimes we get in our own way because we spend too much time thinking about, like, oh my, what should my picture look like? What time of day should I post? How many times should I post? My philosophy is if you're posting quality content, you're going to get a quality result over time. But I'm curious as to your thoughts on how do we really double down on the brand element? How do you successfully use all of these mediums at your disposal to meet the audience that you want to meet?
Yeah. So I'll say here's the biggest, I would say, misconception with personal brand. People, for whatever reason, have this idea that their personal brand is something that they need to create, and it's not. Your personal brand is who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in, the work that you do, the problems that you solve, all of those things. That is your brand. Your brand already exists. You need to just start getting more public about it and sharing things around that. And, I can't even tell you how, let's just talk about LinkedIn, here for a second, if you're posting content there or if you're not, and you want to get started, right? So a lot of people think that like having a lot of followers or having a lot of comments or having a lot of likes, like chasing those vanity metrics matter, but they actually don't. Because I would say that there's two things that really generates the most leads for me on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is by far our number one lead source. And it's the relationships that I've built through the platform. Maybe we had a conversation, I tried to add some value to them, maybe connected them with people, maybe educated them on something they had questions about. They weren't even people that were, likely to buy from me or needed what I had. And then what happens is on LinkedIn, somebody might say, hey, I'm getting ready to start a podcast. And that person that I made some sort of impression or impact on then tags me saying, hey, you need to talk to Collin. And that happens often. So that's not because I put out a post. That's not because I have 15,000 followers. That's not because my last poll got 10,000 impressions. It's not because of any of that. It's because I made a simple connection on LinkedIn and built an actual relationship by providing value. And it doesn't take a lot of time. And a lot of people, have the excuse of, I don't have time to do that all the time. And you got to make time to do it. Like, it only takes 15, 20 minutes to get on a call with somebody and see how you can maybe add some value. And you're not going to be able to do it with everybody, but the people that you do, they're going to be your biggest advocates. They're going to be your biggest fans. And if they can find a way to help generate some business for you, they will. And so the second part to that is the other biggest way that we, get leads on LinkedIn is not from people that are liking and commenting and engaging all of the time. None of that. It's the lurkers. It's the people that are consumers, not creators. They're typically not engaging. But most times than not, those are your buyers in most cases. I don't know the numbers. You might know better than me, like how many people on the platform there is actually on the platform and how many of those people are actually creating original content. I don't know those numbers. Maybe you do. But what I can tell you is by putting content out, like you said, it's your billboard, right? So by putting that content out regularly, you're going to attract the people that you can solve problems for. And those people slide into your DMs. Those people send you a message. Hey, I've been seeing what you've been doing. Seems like you can maybe help me. Or, hey, I have some questions around this particular thing. Seems like you're an expert in that. Those are the type of messages that I get. And typically those people, I don't even know who the heck they are. I've never engaged with them. They've never liked anything. They've never put out content. And those are the two biggest ways that we get leads on the platform. And it has nothing to do with like tons of followers, tons of likes or comments or any of that stuff. Now, one more thing that I'll add is that people typically get really caught in this trap of creating content that's not relevant. They try to create clickbait or things that are going to get people's attention or going to get, maybe ruffle people's feathers a little bit to get them, to comment. And what purpose is that serving? If you're not putting out content that's relevant to the type of relationships that you want to build on the platform, to the type of customers that you serve that you're hoping to find you on the platform, what the heck are you doing?
So well said. And so you got me intrigued. First off, Collin, I did look up the stats. So not only are there 756 million people that are total LinkedIn users, but less than half of that are active monthly users. So 310 million globally, but about 70% of those are outside the United States where we reside. So very interesting stats. I'm going to put that link in the chat whenever we get this posted. But you hit on some really important stuff around. First off, don't gravitate toward the shiny object in spite of a relationship that you could create and nurture. There's so much obsession around likes, comments, engagement, but I will tell you that brand for me has gotten me exactly where I want to be in my career because of the perception that was created of the value that I've been fighting so tirelessly to add and contribute for so long. And a lot of the people that notice that, it wasn't people that were liking, commenting, sending me messages on LinkedIn. It was, hey, I pulled up, every time I pull up my LinkedIn, I see something around, you sharing this conversation, or like you started a dialogue the other day that made my day, or was like super, super impactful, or I shared with my team. I don't see those metrics, but that's the reason that I do what I do. And I think that's the key element. What amazes me is the people who tell me or tag me, as you said, in some of these other types of things where a relationship is created. And I think that's why we've got to look away from the reason that, somebody might go out and they make a blog post, they post it out there, it doesn't get likes or comments or shares or whatever it is, and then they stop because they didn't get the result they thought they wanted. But you never know those hidden, kind of those hustle stats, those intangibles. You never know the value that you're really bringing and adding. And I think you've got to think about brand the right way. I loved what you said about the fact that the brand is already there. It's kind of like the old adage, if a tree falls in a forest and there's nobody around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, of course it does. It just matters what sound is actually being made. How many people can we get that sound to reach? And that's what social enables you to do. You can get your messaging, your unique skills, the problems you solve. You can exemplify that in your brand, and you can get that in front of more people and hopefully create more relationships. Make sure you understand the why behind what you're doing. And it should always be to create new, interesting relationships where you can have a mutual value share and that you can make each other's lives better.
Yeah. And the key there is being intentional about the types of relationships that you're building. You know, what relationships are important to you right now? You know, are you looking for clients, partners, people to collaborate with? Like those are the type of people that you want to focus on building relationships with. And not just, you know, sort of catch all connect with anybody. Because that also hurts you too. Like if you're even, you know, a lot of people will just accept connections from anybody to get their connection follower rate up, and that hurts you more than it helps you. Because then, you know, the amount of followers that you have versus the type, you know, people that are actually engaging, because you're putting content out that to people that are like not even relevant to what you do. So having a lot of followers is not the great answer there, and having the right followers, having quality followers in your network is much more important. And I had to learn that the hard way, where I actually had to start to like prune some of my connections. Like these people are not relevant to me, and it's actually hurting me because my content's not getting as much reach or exposure to the people that I actually want to reach. So, you know, it's very important to make sure you're connecting and building relationships with the right people. And then also make sure you're putting out content that serves them properly, right? Not content that's not relevant to them. Like, you know, I don't know, if you sell into IT people, talking about making President's Club and giving your best cold call scripts away doesn't serve those people. You're
That's
not
true.
going to, you know, it might get a lot of likes and comments if you're connecting with a bunch of salespeople, but unless you do anything in the sales space, or unless you sell into that, you know, role, then your LinkedIn strategy or your social strategy makes no sense.
It's very true. And I think you hit on something important there as far as being very intentional about what you're attempting to do. What would you say to somebody who struggles with, and look, I think part of us, we've got to all own up. Like all of us have been guilty with tinkering with some of these things probably at some time or another. You just said, like you've kind of pilfered some of the, you know, some of the followers, some of the connections, because you realized that it wasn't adding value overall and that it wasn't the right connection. So what do you tell somebody who struggles with that, you know, that balance on their profile? You know, they want to have connections. Maybe they are using it for their career, but also to sell. Like, what do you tell somebody that fits in that vein?
Yeah, I mean, so like, let's say you're a seller, like, you know, connecting with other sellers and collaborating and having some, you know, peers. There's some importance to that, but like your content shouldn't be serving those people, right? So building those types of relationships, like if you're looking for somebody to mentor or you're looking for people to mentor, then building some of those relationships on the platform makes sense. And, you know, maybe you put a percentage of content out that serves those people, but the majority of what you do should be connecting with the people that you want to work with and creating content that's going to be valuable to them. And it's a simple recipe to do that. Like, it's not that hard to come up with original content. Like, take the conversations that you're having with your prospects and use that as fuel, as ideas to talk about, like, hey, this particular problem, here's how you would solve it, or here's some tips how to tackle these things. Like, what's the information that's coming up in the conversations that you're having, and use that as sort of creative juice to come up with, you know, content to post on, you know, on LinkedIn. And so, you know, maybe having a good balance, you know, and also too, for people that have maybe, you know, had, you know, many different sales jobs, and maybe they used to sell into a particular vertical, and then they have a lot of those connections, and now they do something totally different. It might be time to give up some of those. If you haven't really built a relationship with those people, and it was just like a connect once, and like you've never spoken to them, you never did business with them, like you might want to start to prune some of those and get rid of them, because they're really actually hurting you more than they're helping you.
That is super valuable feedback. I mean, any seller that's out there on LinkedIn today needs to hear that. So well done. Well said. Anything else, Collin, you want to hit on? I know we're a little over time, so I appreciate you sticking with me. Anything else you want to hit on before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little biased, right? So one thing that you can do to solve a lot of these things is have a podcast, and doesn't mean you need to work with somebody like us. Like, I have a post that's a featured piece of content that tells you like everything you need to do to have a podcast for under $200. And, you know, it doesn't need to be the, you know, best, fanciest top 100 podcast. But this can, you know, help you get access and build relationships with the people that can drive revenue for you, collaborate and create content, and make sure that you have stuff to post all of the time, while also really flexing your muscles around, you know, like asking better questions, listening better, being curious, which are all skills that are transferable over to any sales role that you do. And then everybody always tells, you know, at least early sellers or, you know, even sellers that are a little bit more seasoned, like you need to know your prospects, you need to speak their language, you need to read their books, read their blogs, and do all these things. Well, those are all good, but it's a lot more fun if you actually just have conversations with them, ask them any question that you want, and all of that information that you gather in those conversations is going to go with you in any other sales conversation that you have with any other prospect or any other customer thereafter.
Well said.